Gee, when you hear yourself referred to as legendary, it sounds like you're dead, but not quite there yet. Before I begin, let me acknowledge that this is the traditional territory of Aboriginal people who inhabited and cared for this land for thousands of years. Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. I want to thank the Opera House for giving me the opportunity to share a few ideas with you this evening. And I must say it is a delight and an honor to share the stage with two of my personal heroes, Tim Flannery and Naomi Oreskes. I speak here today not on behalf of any group or organization, no political party or corporation. I speak tonight as a grandfather and as an elder. And I believe as an elder, this is the most important time in my life. You see, I don't have to play any games. I don't have to worry about getting a job, a promotion, a raise. Elders are no longer driven by a need for money or power or celebrity or sex. Well, some people are, but they need help. They need help. And as elders, we have no hidden agenda. An elder has something that no other group in society has. We've lived an entire life, and we've learned a lot. We've made mistakes, suffered failures, celebrated successes. Those are hard-won life lessons that I believe our job now is to sift through that lifetime, to look for those hard-won lessons to share with the coming generations. So I tell my fellow elders, come on, get off the golf course, get off the couch, and get on with the most important job and responsibility you have today. This evening, I'd like to provide you with a big picture of where we are and some context for Naomi and Tim to follow. I'm a biologist by training, and as a scientist, I've been amazed at the trajectory of our species. It's absolutely unprecedented and amazing. We began rather unremarkably as a species in Africa on the plains of that great continent 150,000 years ago. And from that humble beginning, we have come to dominate the planet. We are now the most numerous mammal on Earth. We've spread across the globe, occupying incredibly diverse ecosystems from the Arctic to deserts, from temperate rainforests and tropical rainforests to grasslands and mountains and wetlands. Now, as scientists, divide the history of the planet into periods based on significant changes in the state of the Earth. And now they tell us we are in the Anthropocene, a very, very recent moment in Earth time when humans have become the major factor shaping the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the planet on a geological scale. There has never been a single species able to do this in all the history of life on Earth. Today, we claim, as a result of our great dominance, 88% of the terrestrial portion of the planet as ours, to do as we wish with it, leaving 12% of the rest of the terrestrial part of the planet to the perhaps 30 million other species that share the Earth with us. But in the process of applying the great power we have, we are undermining the very things that keep us alive and healthy. I began my career as a geneticist in 1962. I had studied for 8 years in the United States and returned to Canada, where I was determined to be a hotshot geneticist, only to be completely derailed by a woman. That's happened to me over and over again through my life. Most of the time they were catastrophes, but in this case, I am eternally grateful to her. I regret very much that I never met her, but her name was Rachel Carson. In 1962, Rachel Carson published a book called Silent Spring, all about the unexpected effects of pesticides. When her book came out, there wasn't a single Department of the Environment in any government in the world. The word environment then simply didn't mean what it has come to mean to us today. For me as a scientist, as I read her book, I was just absolutely astonished when she showed us that everything on Earth is connected. You spray chemicals on farmers' fields to kill insects, and you end up affecting fish and birds and human beings. When DDT was found to kill insects, Paul Mueller, the scientist, won a Nobel Prize for that discovery in 1948. Scientists thought this was an absolutely incredible technology. But when eagles began to disappear in North America, scientists tracked down the cause and discovered a phenomenon they didn't even know existed called biomagnification. Spray at low concentrations in the environment, and as those molecules move up the food chain, you concentrate it until you get to the shell glands of birds and the breasts of women, concentrating DDT hundreds of thousands of times. So science can't anticipate the consequences of these very powerful technologies. And so because of her book, like millions of people around the world, I was swept up in what we now recognize as the modern environmental movement. We saw explosive growth around the world. Departments of the environment, committees on the environment set up at every level of governments throughout the world. In only 10 years, we had the first international conference on the environment in Stockholm in 1972. The United Nations established the United Nations Environment Program. And laws were passed all over the world to protect air and water and endangered species. Millions of hectares of land were set aside as parks and reserves. It was an incredible, successful movement. Over the years in British Columbia, where I lived, we celebrated victories. The American proposal to bring super tankers of oil from the North Slopes of Alaska through BC waters down to be refined in Seattle, we stopped that. Drilling for oil, there were proposals to drill in sensitive areas like Hecate Strait off the coast of BC and in the Arctic, and again, we were able to stop those proposals. Dams were being built on the Peace River, northern British Columbia, on the Xingu River, tributary of the Amazon in Brazil. And my wife and I were very involved in the Brazilian campaign, and we stopped those dams. But now, 30 to 35 years later, we are fighting the very same battles over again. We didn't win in the long run. Those were not true victories. And as environmentalists, we failed to use those battles to change the way we see ourselves in the biosphere, to see our relationship with nature in a different way. And so we've come to live in a fragmented world where we no longer see the exquisite interconnectivity of everything in the biosphere. We no longer see that we, as biological creatures, are still dependent on nature for our survival and well-being. I don't believe the main problem today as we face issues like climate change are the real problem is not technological, economic, or even social. The primary problem we face is psychological. The beliefs and the values we hold shape our behavior and our actions. And the fact that we are fighting the same battles over and over again shows that we haven't changed our belief and value system. And so we continue to attack the biosphere in the same way. Our perceptual lenses are influenced by gender, by ethnicity, by religion, by socioeconomic position. Many years ago, I visited a small village on the side of a mountain in the Andes range in Peru, and I learned there that children are taught that that mountain is an apu. Apu in their language means a god. And as long as that apu casts its shadow on the village, it will determine the destiny of everyone in that village. And I thought, wow, imagine how those children, when they grow up, will treat that mountain compared to a kid in British Columbia who grows up in the Rocky Mountains believing those mountains are filled with gold and silver. The way we see the world shapes the way we treat it. Human beings are predators. We have to exploit plants and animals for our survival. But the perceptual lenses through which we regard them conditions the manner in which we will use them. If a forest is a sacred grove, we will extract timber and pulp with reverence. If a river is the circulatory system of the land, we will take far more care in how we use it for irrigation and power. If soil is a complex community of organisms, we wouldn't just treat it as dirt. If another species is our biological kin, sharing thousands of genes identical with each other through our common evolutionary history, then we would treat them as relatives with greater respect. If our house is our home, that's far different than if it's a piece of real estate or a starter house or a teardown. If Earth is our mother, would we treat her the way we do today? The way we see the world informs our every action towards that world. All over the world, indigenous people continue to speak of Earth as our mother. And when they say that, it's not being poetic or metaphoric. They mean it literally, that we are created out of the elements of the earth. And for most of human existence, that's how humans around the world saw their relationship with nature. But with the great wave of exploration, exploitation, and colonization over the past 500 years, that changed. My grandparents were part of that wave. They left Japan for Canada between 1902 and 1906. They were uneducated and they were poor, and they came to Canada for opportunity. They knew nothing of the indigenous people. They cared nothing for them, and so they learned nothing from them. They knew that if they came to this new land and worked hard, then land was an opportunity for them. If they could get money and buy land, then if there were fish on that land, catch them and sell them. If there were trees, cut them down and sell them. If there was good topsoil, grow vegetables and sell them. If there were minerals under it, dig them up and sell them. When they left Japan, my grandparents knew it was a one-way trip. They were never going back. There were no telephones then. There was no airplanes. There was no Skype. They knew that they were going away forever from Japan. My parents were born and raised in Vancouver. Dad in 1909, my mother in 1911. And like all of the Japanese Canadian kids born in Canada at that time, they had no grandparents and no elders. They were back in Japan. In other words, they had no roots in the place that they were growing up. My grandparents never learned to speak English, and so I never had a conversation with my grandparents. Rachel Carson caused me to rethink our place on the planet. I didn't know. It wasn't in my background through my grandparents. And I was swept up in those environmental battles, and we fought. We lost many. But I've come to think that we cannot go on fighting any longer, because in any fight, there's a winner and a loser. And we can't afford to have losers when we're talking about the future of the very atmosphere that sustains us. Instead of fighting, I believe we have to come together and first agree on what our most fundamental needs are. Needs that we must guarantee for everyone and protect for everyone. 3 years ago, the CEO of one of the largest oil companies in Alberta's tar sands in Canada called me. I was quite surprised. And he said, would it be possible for me to have a conversation with you. I said, I'd love to. I'm not into fighting anymore. Come down and see me. The next morning, he showed up at my office, and I was thrilled. I welcomed him. I thanked him for coming. I told him how honored I was. But I said, please, before you come into my office, do me a favor. Leave your identity as the CEO of a company outside the door. I want to meet you as a human being to human being. Because, Mr. CEO, I want to talk about what we both agree are the most important needs that we both have. He wasn't very happy about that. But to his credit, he came through the door reluctantly, and I sat him down in my office, and I said, look, I know this isn't what you were prepared to talk about, but I would like to first set the table. I said, you know, we live in a world that is shaped, that is created, that is constrained by laws of nature. Nobody questions those laws. We live within them. Physics tells you that we cannot build a rocket that will travel faster than the speed of light, and we understand that. Physics tells us the laws of gravity mean you can't have an anti-gravity machine on Earth. The first and second laws of thermodynamics tell us we can't build a perpetual motion machine. No one denies that or attempts to override those laws. We understand that. That's set by physics. In chemistry, it's the same. The laws of chemistry tell us that the atomic properties of the elements determine the kinds of atoms we can actually put into a test tube and react together. There are diffusion constants and reaction rates that tell us the kind of molecules we can synthesize and what we can't make. And those are dictated by the laws of chemistry. And no one tries to overcome that. And biology is the same. Every species on the planet has a maximum number that can be achieved before crashing in numbers. And that maximum number is determined by the carrying capacity of an ecosystem or a habitat. Humans, of course, aren't confined to specific ecosystems or habitats. We use our intelligence, and we're able to adapt ourselves or change our surroundings and live in many different kinds of ecosystems. But our home is really the biosphere, the zone of air, water, and land where all life exists. And there are limits to the ability of the biosphere to carry human beings. The population number, of course, is determined not just by the number, but by the consumption per capita. But scientists agree overwhelmingly that we are beyond the carrying capacity of the planet, of the biosphere, for our species. And it is we in the industrialized countries, when you multiply our numbers by consumption, who are vastly overpopulated. That's determined by the carrying capacity of systems. Biology indicates that you and I, we are all biological creatures. I remember giving a talk in Austin, Texas many years ago, and there were a number of children in the audience, and I said, now kids, if there's one thing you remember from my talk, remember we are animals. Man, did their parents get pissed off at me. Don't you call my daughter an animal. We're human beings. And I said, well, madam, if you're not an animal, are you a plant? We are animals. And as animals, biology indicates that there are certain realities. And I said to the CEO, what do you think is the most important thing that every human being needs as an animal? And I could see he was sitting there going, money, job. And I said, you know, if you don't have air for 3 minutes, you're dead. If you have to breathe polluted air, you're sick. So could you not agree with me that clean air has got to be the highest priority for our species, that we must do everything we can to protect the purity of that air? And then I said, you know, you and I are 60 to 70% water by weight. We're basically a big blob of water with enough organic thickener added that we don't dribble away on the floor. But you know, our bodies leak water. It comes out of our skin and our eyes and our mouth and our crotch, and we lose water all the time. So we have to keep topping up. If you don't have water for 4 to 6 days, you're dead. If you have to drink contaminated water, you're sick. So, Mr. CEO, would you agree with me that water, clean water, like clean air, is a fundamental need, a priority for all people on Earth? And then I said, food. If you don't have food for 4 to 6 weeks, you're dead. If you have to eat contaminated food, you're sick. Most of our food comes from the soil. So can you agree with me that food and soil must be there along with clean air and clean water? And finally, all of the energy that we have in our bodies that we need to move and grow and reproduce, all of that energy is sunlight. Sunlight captured by plants through photosynthesis, converted into chemical energy, and then we get it by eating the plants or the animals that eat the plants, and we store it in our bodies. And when we need that energy, we burn those molecules and liberate the energy of the sun back out into our bodies. And so I said photosynthesis has got to be like clean air, clean water, clean soil, a fundamental need of all human beings. And then I said the miracle of life on Earth is these 4 things that Native people call the 4 sacred elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Those 4 sacred elements are replenished, are cleansed, are created by the web of living things. It's all of the green things in the world, in the water and on land, that take carbon dioxide out of the air and have made our atmosphere oxygen rich. It's plant roots and soil microorganisms that filter water as it percolates through the soil so that we can drink it. It's life. All of our food was once alive, and the soil in which we grow our food is created by life. That's if you've seen the movie The Martian recently. You remember Matt Damon was stranded on Mars and had to stretch his potatoes out. But on Mars, how do you grow anything? There's no soil. He had to shit in a hole and put the potato in it in order to grow his potatoes. It's life that creates the very soil on which we grow our food. And of course, it's life that does all of the photosynthesis to give us the energy that we capture from the sun. So these are the things that I believe are fundamental to the way that we live and should be protected by every society around the world. Other things are not forces of nature or come from laws of nature. The boundaries we draw around our property, our cities, our provinces, our countries, those are not forces of nature. Nature couldn't care less about human boundaries. We create concepts like capitalism or communism, the economy, markets, corporations. These, again, are not forces of nature, although when you listen to people commenting on the economy, you'd swear it was a thing. I don't know how it is in Australia, but in Canada, you hear, oh, the market's not looking too happy today. And you think, wow, that poor market, is just sitting there going, man, I feel crummy today. The market, these are human constructs. Why is it we're constantly trying to force nature, shoehorn nature, to fit our constructs? We had a prime minister for 10 years, thank God we just got rid of him, who... he said, we can't do anything about climate change, it'll destroy the economy. So he elevated the economy above the very atmosphere that keeps us alive. So we have to now take the human constructs those are the one thing we can change and make them conform to the real world in which we live. This is what I told the CEO, and I asked him then, I said, look, I've given you my pitch. Would you shake hands with me and agree? And I'm sorry to say that he wouldn't. And he left a very unhappy man, and I never heard from him again. And I heard that he resigned or was fired a year later. But it was very unfair of me. He had come as the CEO of a corporation. He had come to negotiate something. If he were to go back to his shareholders and say, well, I had a conversation with Suzuki, I have to agree with him, we can't do anything to affect the air, the water, the soil, he'd be fired in a flash. So as long as we allow corporations and the economy to provide the constraints that limit our conversation, the earth is going to suffer every time. So our crisis is the crisis in our minds, the way we see the world that shapes the way that we treat that world. And that is the challenge to bring about change. We'll talk about this some more later. Thank you very much.